My name is Rowan Hale, 27 years old, with wind-tangled chestnut hair, grey-green eyes, and a lean build shaped more by long walks than hard labour. My friends used to tease me about the faint constellation of freckles across my shoulders, as if the stars had claimed me long before I ever set foot in Stardew Valley. Tonight, those same freckles prickle with the cool touch of rain as I stand in the doorway of my newly inherited farmhouse. The roof above me hums with a steady, soothing patter, but the old boards beneath my boots feel anything but calm. The place is beautiful in a lonely, overgrown way. Wild vines crawling up the porch posts, the scent of wet earth drifting from the unploughed fields, and the soft glow of lantern light pooling around my ankles. I came here expecting quiet, a fresh start, yet the moment I stepped inside, I felt something shift, a low tremor, almost like the soil itself stirred under the floorboards, as if the land had been waiting for me. What do you think is about to rise from this rain-soaked beginning? When I finally crossed the threshold of the farmhouse, the damp air followed me in like a curious cat. The door creaked shut behind me, and for a moment I just stood there, letting my eyes adjust to the dim glow of the single lantern hanging from a rusty hook. The room smelled of pine, old dust, and something faintly sweet, maybe dried sap or the remnants of past harvests. Whatever it was, it wrapped around me like a memory I couldn't quite place. I set my bag on the warped little table by the window. The rain drummed a steady rhythm on the rooftop, the kind of sound that's supposed to lull a person to sleep, but my pulse was tapping out its own faster beat, that strange tremor I'd felt earlier. I couldn't dismiss it, not when it seemed to echo up through the soles of my boots even now. I crouched down and pressed my palm to one of the floorboards. The wood was cool, the grain rough beneath my fingers. Nothing moved. Maybe I'd imagined it. Wishful thinking from someone desperate for a change, or nerves settling after a long trip. But then, just as I started to pull my hand away, there was a faint thump. Not sharp, not threatening, more like the sound of someone gently knocking from below. My breath caught. I stayed perfectly still, listening. The rain muted everything, but that quiet knock came again, followed by a subtle shift in the board, as though it rose a fraction under my fingertips. I jerked back, nearly bumping into my own luggage. A normal person might have run outside, or pretended none of it happened, but curiosity has always held me tighter than fear. I grabbed the lantern and lowered myself to the floor again, examining the plank. It looked ordinary enough, but a tiny line of darker wood curved along its edge, as if something underneath had pressed upward. I wedged my fingers under it and lifted. The board came loose with surprising ease, revealing a narrow pocket of space between the floor and the packed soil below. The lantern light caught on something pale nestled in the dirt. At first, I thought it was a rock, but when I brushed away the soil, a small knotted root curled toward my wrist, like it was reaching out. I froze. It wasn't moving. Not now, anyway, but it had definitely been the cause of the knocking. Roots didn't just grow this way. They didn't push with intention. I straightened up, heart thumping. The farmhouse creaked softly, as if settling into the storm. I could hear the wind sweeping over the fields outside, bending the tall grasses in waves. The land didn't feel hostile. Not exactly. More like it was trying to say something. Welcome, maybe, or hurry. To shake off the tension, I forced myself to explore the rest of the house. The living room opened into a tiny kitchen with a pot-bellied old stove and a counter worn smooth by decades of use. A row of mason jars lined a shelf above the sink, each filled with dust instead of preserves. I ran my hand along them, imagining the hands that placed them there years before. Whoever lived here last must have had a soft spot for simple things. The bedroom was small but cozy, with a quilted blanket folded neatly at the foot of the bed, and a stack of yellowed letters tied with twine resting on the nightstand. I didn't open them. Not yet. The rain outside intensified, tapping harder against the windows. I listened to it, letting the sound unravel some of the tightness in my chest. But even as the cottage warmth started to settle around me, my thoughts kept circling back to the root beneath the floorboards, the way it had pressed upward, almost like it knew I had arrived. Maybe the stories I'd heard about Stardew Valley weren't exaggerations. People had whispered about fertile soil, ancient spirits, and crops that thrived as if touched by old magic. I always assumed those tales were just romanticized folklore. Maybe not. I returned to the main room and peered again at the open floorboard. The root sat quietly now, looking harmless enough. I tucked the board back into place but didn't nail it down. Something told me I might need access to it again. As the lantern flickered and the storm deepened, I sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on knees, trying to make sense of everything. The valley felt alive in a way I'd never experienced. Like the rain, the soil, even the shadows were leaning in, waiting to see what I'd do next. And honestly, I was wondering the same thing. Morning arrived, before I felt ready for it. The storm had softened sometime near dawn, leaving the world wrapped in that misty hush you only get after a long night of rain. I woke to the gentle drip of water sliding off the eaves, and the faint, earthy scent of soaked soil drifting through the cracked window. For a second, I forgot where I was. Then the creaky ceiling, the quilt at my feet, and the memory of that restless root snapped everything back into place. I swung my legs out of bed and padded across the wooden floor, half expecting the board I'd loosened to shift under my weight. It didn't. In fact, the whole room felt strangely still, like whatever had stirred the earth last night was now lying dormant. I crouched down and pressed my hand to the board again just to check. Cool. Unmoving. Almost innocent. I wasn't fooled. Before dealing with any mysterious plant life, I needed food. The kitchen wasn't much help. The old stove was stubborn about lighting, and the cupboards offered nothing more than a jar of stale oats and a tin of questionable tea. I forced down the oats anyway. Hunger has a way of lowering standards. Then grabbed my coat and stepped outside. The valley greeted me with a silver fog clinging low to the fields, draped over everything like a half-awake dream. Raindrops clung to the fence rails and sparkled on the tall grass. The smell of wet earth was rich and heavy, almost sweet. I took a deep breath and felt some of yesterday's tension loosen its grip. But as I scanned the fields, I noticed something odd. The soil closest to the farmhouse looked freshly turned, the dark muck smoothed in gentle ripples. I hadn't touched it. Even rain didn't usually reshape soil like that. I walked over and knelt down. The earth was warm, warmer than it should have been after such a chilly storm. When I dug my fingers in, I felt a faint vibration, like the ground was purring. I yanked my hand back and wiped it on my pants. Okay, so the house wasn't the only thing behaving. Strangely, I decided to explore the property, see if anything else felt alive. The path behind the house wound between two overgrown plots before leading to a small moss-covered shed. Its door hung crookedly from one hinge, and a chorus of little creak sounds echoed inside. When I pushed the door open, 3 mice scurried out past my boots, squeaking indignantly. The shed smelled like mildew and forgotten projects. A jumble of rusty tools leaned against one wall. Shovels, a sickle, an old hoe, whose wooden handle had split nearly in two. I picked up the least corroded shovel and immediately felt a subtle thrum in the ground beneath me, as if something acknowledged the gesture. Not creepy at all, I muttered. I left the shed and continued toward a cluster of old fruit trees at the edge of the property. Their branches drooped with moisture, leaves still trembling from the night's weather. When I pressed my hand to one of the trunks, the bark felt warm too, alive in a way that pulsed, gently beneath my fingertips. The root system below shifted faintly, not enough to startle, just enough to remind me it was there. Maybe the valley wasn't just fertile, maybe it was aware. As I was contemplating this unsettling possibility, I heard a soft splash behind me. I spun around just in time to see a small puddle near the path ripple outward, as if something had stepped through it, though nothing was there. The ripples widened, then faded, leaving only the reflection of the sky. I swallowed hard and headed back to the farmhouse, resisting the urge to glance over my shoulder every few steps. The place looked strangely welcoming from a distance, its windows glistening with leftover rain, and its chimney puffing a thin line of steam from the wood I'd lit earlier. But the moment I reached the porch, I felt it again, a gentle push beneath the floorboards, like the earth was trying to nudge me inside. When I opened the door, the loose board was raised again, slightly askew. Not enough to look tampered with, but enough for me to know something below had stirred. I knelt and lifted it carefully. The small root I'd seen last night had grown, not dramatically, but noticeably. its pale tendrils thicker, its tip angled upward, as if searching for air or light or me. A shiver ran up my spine. I sat back on my heels, staring at it. The farmhouse seemed to quiet around me, as if waiting for my reaction. Whatever was happening here, I wasn't imagining it, and the soil, warm and restless beneath the house, wasn't done with me yet. I didn't touch the root right away. I just watched it, half expecting it to wriggle like a startled worm. But it stayed still, its pale tip resting in the lantern glow, like a curled finger frozen mid-gesture. I could swear it hadn't just grown. It had moved, shifted, positioned itself, the way a plant might lean towards sunlight. Only there was no sun down here, just me. I backed away slowly and sat on the edge of the table, hands clasped. Between my knees, the farmhouse walls creaked in the gentle morning breeze, the last of the storm clouds drifting past the windows. You'd think daylight would make everything feel less eerie, but honestly, it just made the strangeness clearer. I needed air and distance. I stepped outside again, leaving the door propped open in case I suddenly had the urge to sprint back inside. Not that the house felt dangerous, more like over-eager. The mud squished beneath my boots as I headed toward the fence line. The fog had thinned, revealing more of my property than I realized I owned. Rows of wild grass shimmered with leftover raindrops. Birds chattered in the trees, sounding relieved after being pelted all night. I took a long breath and felt some of the tension uncoil from my shoulders. Then I heard it, a soft rustle, not quite wind, not quite animal, a sort of deliberate shifting from the field to my right. I turned, half expecting a deer or maybe a stray dog, but instead I found nothing, just grass swaying, except the movement wasn't spreading like normal wind. It was traveling, a ripple pushing through the field toward me, parting the blades in a narrow path. My heart jumped. I stepped back until my shoulders hit the fence. "Okay," I whispered to no one, or maybe to the land itself. "You've got my attention." The ripple stopped a few feet from where I stood. The soil there lifted just a little, like a mole tunnel rising, but smoother, more controlled. A small mound, pushed upward, then settled again. When it stilled, the grass trembled once in a way that felt almost like a nod. I didn't move for a long time. Eventually, the breeze caught the grass and everything looked normal again. I let out a shaky breath. Right, sure, totally fine. Pretending I'd imagined it wouldn't fix anything. So I went to the barn. The barn was old, but sturdier than the shed. Its big double doors groaned but opened without falling off their hinges, which felt like a win. Inside, it smelled of hay, dust, and damp wood. Light filtered through cracks in the roof in thin golden beams. The place was empty, except for a few abandoned feed buckets and a pile of tools in one corner. I ran my hand along one of the support beams. It felt warm too. Everything on this land did, but the warmth here was different. Less aware, more like leftover heat from long-gone livestock. A ladder led to the loft, so I climbed up. The old boards flexed under my weight, but held. From the loft, window, I could see nearly the whole property. The house sat snug against a gentle slope, the orchard a loose scatter of trees, and the fields stretching wide and wild. I watched the grass for several minutes, waiting for another ripple, another shift. Nothing happened, just birds flitting around, and a few clouds drifting lazily across the sky. When I climbed back down and stepped outside, the earth felt calmer, or I was just getting used to it, which might have been worse. On my way back to the farmhouse, I stopped at the freshly turned patch of soil again. The warmth hadn't faded. If anything, it pulsed a little stronger. I knelt and spread my fingers across the dirt. The vibration was there, soft, steady, almost like a heartbeat. I didn't pull away this time. Instead, I murmured, "What are you trying to tell me?" As if in response, the soil shifted beneath my palm. A tiny root tip, no larger than a thread, pushed gently upward between my fingers before settling back into the earth. Not reaching for me, not threatening, just greeting me. I sat back on my heels, stunned. Something in this valley recognized me, or needed me, or both. When I returned to the house, the loose board was lifted again, waiting like an open invitation. I knelt beside it, hands steady for the first time since I arrived. The root's pale tendril curled toward the light, as if it had been waiting for me to come back. "Okay," I whispered, feeling a strange calm settle over me. "I'm listening," and the earth, warm and humming beneath the floorboards, stirred in answer. The moment I whispered that I was listening, the farmhouse seemed to hold its breath. Even the lantern flame stilled, barely flickering. I knelt beside the lifted board, heart thudding, but steady. The root waited there, pale and patient, its tiny tip tilted toward me as if expecting something. A word, a touch, a promise. I wasn't sure. I reached out slowly, letting my fingers hover just above it. The root didn't move, but the soil beneath it gave a tiny shift, like the land was exhaling. Finally, I let my fingertips brush the tendril. A warmth spread up my hand. Not burning, not frightening, just warm, like dipping into sun-soaked water. The warmth pulsed once, twice, then faded, leaving a faint tingle behind. When I pulled my hand back, the root curled ever so slightly, retreating into its little pocket of earth. I sat back, legs crossed, trying to wrap my head around what had just happened. I wasn't scared anymore, at least not in the way I had been. Whatever this was, it didn't feel hostile. It felt lonely and calling out. Still, I needed answers, and those letters on the nightstand, maybe they held some. I went to the bedroom and lifted the stack of yellowed envelopes. The twine around them frayed like dried grass. My thumb brushed across the top letter's corner, soft from years of handling. They were addressed to someone named Maribel Hale. Hale, my last name too. My grandmother's first name had been Maribel. I sat on the bed and untied the twine. The letters smelled faintly of lavender and smoke, like they'd absorbed decades of warm nights by a fire. I opened the earliest one. The handwriting tilted neatly across the page, elegant but firm, the loops of each letter like tiny vines curling around themselves. I didn't read every line, just enough to see what mattered. Notes about the land, about how the soil responded when she tended it, how roots would rise toward her boots when she watered, the fields, how she felt watched, but not by anything with eyes. She wrote about seasons where crops grew twice as fast, nights when the ground vibrated like a purr, mornings where the orchard leaned as if listening to her footsteps, and near the end of the letter, a line in harsher, hurried ink. "It's searching for an heir who can hear it." My breath caught. Another letter described a night when the earth beneath her bed shifted, waking her gently. A sign, she thought, that her connection to the valley was deepening. A blessing, but also a warning. She wrote that the valley grew restless when ignored, that it needed a caretaker who wasn't afraid of its quirks, its moods, its hunger for attention. I folded the letter and placed it on my lap. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or lie down, or run into the field shouting, "I get it now," because suddenly, everything made sense. The root below the floor, the vibrating soil, the way the land had nudged me, guided me, greeted me. It had chosen me, or maybe it had been waiting all along. A gentle tap sounded beneath the floorboards in the next room, subtle, rhythmic, almost polite. I hurried back, letters in hand. The loose plank had risen again, not enough to expose the soil, just enough to let me know the valley wasn't done talking. I knelt beside it. "I'm still here," I murmured. The tapping stopped. The silence didn't feel empty now. It felt satisfied. I pressed my hand to the board. The warmth pulsed up through my palm, stronger than before, like a handshake through wood and soil. My grandmother must have felt this too, this steady, grounding connection, like the earth itself was welcoming me home. I stayed like that for a long moment. Then I whispered, "What do you need from me?" For a while, nothing moved. Then the root beneath the wood shifted, pushing the board up just a little more. I lifted it. The tendril had grown again, stretching toward the light, toward air, toward me. It wasn't asking for help exactly. It was showing me something. A path. The soil beneath the floor formed a faint line, a soft furrow stretching deeper into the dark, a direction leading somewhere under the house. "All right," I murmured. "If you're showing me the way, I'll follow." And the earth, warm and humming, seemed to pulse in approval. In the days that followed, the path beneath the farmhouse led me into the quiet heart of the valley's living soil, where the roots threaded together like veins. I learned how they shifted to communicate, how they reached for warmth and attention, the way any lonely creature might. Tending the land became less a chore and more a conversation, watering where the ground hummed, clearing brush where the orchard leaned, letting the farmhouse breathe with its soft, rhythmic pulses. The restlessness faded as the valley recognized my presence, settling into a peaceful cadence. The loose board no longer lifted in alarm. Instead, it rose in greeting each morning, the pale tendril waiting like an old friend. I'd come here searching for a fresh start, but instead, I found a bond older and deeper than I expected, one that taught me that sometimes the quietest places speak the loudest, if you're willing to listen.